We're going to talk about a lot of things this morning, but obviously with so much of the global market turmoil, there couldn't be a better day to be joined for 3 hours by the world's most successful investor. Warren Buffett is here, got up extra early with us because, of course, out here it's only 5 a.m. Warren, thanks for getting up early, first of all.
We got to start this earlier.
You saw what happened overnight based on the elections in Europe over the weekend. What do you think about what's happening right now with the global market sell-off?
Well, it really doesn't make any difference to us. We were buying stocks on Friday, and we'll buy the same stocks today, and we'll buy them a little cheaper. So I never complain about buying things cheaper.
You were buying stocks on Friday. You said stocks multiple. This is not just one issue that you're into?
Just two.
You have two stocks that you're buying?
Yeah.
Are these U.S. stocks?
Yes.
Are these... what I'm going to get out of you on this, but you had two stocks that you were buying. Are these issues you've been looking at for a long time?
It's issues we already own.
Okay, so you're adding to your positions, and you'll buy more today based on this sell-off?
Yeah, the lower they go, the more we like it.
Obviously, though, what's happening right now in Europe is something that people have been looking at for a long time. You've been worried about the euro for a long time as a result. And when you see this shift away from austerity and the pushback that's coming from the voters, what do you think it means for the future of Europe?
It's going to be very, very difficult to resolve their problems. I mean, not only are there problems of having 17 countries, but you've got problems of getting the constituencies in those countries behind and coordinating in some way. So it's a really tough problem.
Did you anticipate, just kind of as you thought things through, that the voters might swing this direction over time?
Well, it's not surprising. I mean, you tell people to tighten their belts, and then you give them a chance to vote on it. It's the real problem of dealing with 17 countries. So because even if you manage to sell the people in 1 or 2 or 3 countries on the fact that it's an advisable course of action, you really need 17 going in the same general direction. And if you're going to have a common monetary unit, you have to have somewhat common fiscal policies as you go along, and it's difficult.
So right now we see what's happening, and we get the fact that this is a bit of a sell-off. This is some trouble that comes along the way. I know it's very difficult to predict what happens, but if you look a little farther, if you try and look 2-3 years down the road, where do you think we'll wind up with Europe?
Well, I really don't know the answer, but there's going to be a lot more episodes. On the other hand, 10 or 20 years from now, Europe will be producing more goods per capita. I mean, Europe is not going to go away. It's a huge market. People have lots of skills. You've got factories. You've got wonderful companies over there. So it isn't like it's the end of the world, but it can be one very messy process in getting from here to there. We will get to there.
What does it do in relationships in the United States? We talked to a lot of people this weekend, including Bill Gates, who pointed out that the United States has not fixed its deficits or its problems. You look at the euro, and it's now at a 3-month low. I think it was dropping and testing that 130 mark earlier this morning. The United States looks like a stronger place. At least the treasuries have been a little safer. But how long can that continue?
I think it can continue a long time. The United States is on a different path, and we addressed the problems of our banks 3 years ago very decisively, and we put lots of capital in them, and they've retained lots of capital, and they've cleaned out a significant percentage of their bad loans. So we have a whole different banking system in the United States, plus we have our own currency. And being able to issue all of your debt in your own currency is just an entirely different game than having to issue it in some other currency.
The ECB has figured out a way to extend its balance sheet, though, with the LTRO. Do you expect more fiscal easing, or more monetary easing policy to come from them?
Well, $1 trillion euros isn't bad. I mean, they really had a funding scare, whatever it was, 5 or 6 months ago, and the banks they're in weak capital positions in many cases. In many cases, they're loaded with sovereign bonds that mark to market don't make them look very good. So they had a big funding problem coming up, and the ECB stepped in, and they stepped in a very major way, and they stepped in with 3-year paper. So we have to congratulate the ECB on heading off that particular kind of a funding crisis. But the problems haven't been solved with the banks over there. The liquidity problems have been solved, the funding problems. But they need more capital, and they've been very reluctant to raise capital. I mean, you have not seen the banks over there go out and raise capital. We had one in Italy that did it, but they've got a lot of problems. I want to emphasize they'll solve them, right. But not necessarily without a lot of pain.
Well, and that's where the politics get awfully ugly. In Greece, for this election over the weekend, we actually saw 20 neo-Nazi candidates who came into power. It's the first time that's happened since 1974, when the military dictatorship fell there. And I guess you've seen a lot of things like this before. Does this worry you as you start to see this turn politically?
There are always a lot of things that worry me in the world, but I also believe that they get resolved. But asking people to vote for pain, not to say a winning group. We're not going to have two candidates in this country that ask people to vote for pain, and it can be done under certain circumstances. I mean, obviously, at a time like World War II, people really voted to restrict their own consumption and activities, all kinds of things. But it's not an easy job, and it's particularly not an easy job to get a number of countries to do it. And they always point to the other guys that he's getting a better deal than we are, and that sort of thing.
I know Joe and Andrew have some questions from back in the studio too, guys.
Questions and comments, I guess.
That's a surprise there.
It's just, I guess the whole structure of the EU and the common currency without the fiscal coordination. I guess I didn't think it through enough to see how it's actually going to work when this happens. You're really talking about the southern countries that have sort of lived beyond their means, saying, no, I won't accept us, even though we're broke. I won't accept austerity, and I want Germany to keep funding my lifestyle. And you're expecting the Germans who have, they had their own trouble when they had to bring in, of Eastern Europe, and they went through a lot of austerity themselves, and they worked hard, and they finally get their day in the sun where things are going well, and you've got an entire southern region asking them to fund their lifestyle. What would normally happen, Warren, I think, is that you can't get people to accept austerity, so you devalue your currency, and de facto, their buying power goes down, and they sort of have to accept it because that's the way it works, and then you have better exports and things. And without being able to do that, I don't see how this finally works, but I don't see, when France, it goes 90-90-90, we're going to elect the socialists and not accept austerity, and we want Germany to keep paying for everything. It's just, I'm watching it happen, and I'm trying to think of what we could, how it would work here. I know that we've got some poor states that the federal government, has to subsidize more than some of the other states, but we just don't feel that way here in this country. They have not accomplished the United States of Europe, and they're nowhere near there.
Well, you should have told them that 15 years ago, because you've given an analysis of the problem, and they do not have an answer for you.
We talked beforehand, Andrew said he's been worried about it for a while, but short of this just not working and just sort of accepting defeat, I don't know how this really looks. I don't know what the next step is in terms of whether someone, don't you think it's time for Greece maybe to exit the euro?
Might have to exit the euro.
Well, everybody might have to but look, that's what I've been saying. I said the second you get Holland in there, the relationship with Merkel is going to be very, very difficult. My question for you, Warren, this morning is there any company that you've been keeping an eye on in Europe, or anything in Europe that you would actually invest in today, given what's happening?
Well, we bought outright a Dutch company late last week. So, Europe isn't going away, but everything that Joe said is 100% correct, and no one knows the answer to the points that he laid out. But that doesn't stop us from buying a good business over there. If I got a call today on some major company in Europe that I understood and that I knew had a good products in the good future, we'd buy it. Now, we take into account what's going on over there, but we buy it.
What would happen now? Go ahead, Andrew.
No, I'd just be embarrassed if I was a French. It'd be like going back to my parents again and again and again and asking for more. Eventually, my pride would stop me from, the proud French. But they can't live the way they've been living, and yet they're still straight face, going back to the Germans, and say we're not going to cut. We're going to continue because there's not enough millionaires. Are there, Warren, to tax at 75% to pay for the 56% of GDP that goes for the government? There's not enough people there to do that.
If you were an impecunious nephew and you had a rich uncle and he goes some big nothing before, not sure you'd be too embarrassed to go back there. You need a little more.
Well, we had a 2.2% GDP too, which was slowing, and for whatever reason, then we had the employment report where I think over the weekend it looked more negative to me. The more I read, the more negative it looked that people gave up on looking for him. There's no way that what's happening over there can possibly be seen as anything but a negative for our numbers, and maybe it doesn't take a material amount off of GDP, but it's certainly not going to add to GDP for us here, will it?
Well, I think you're probably right on that. But the bigger my stocks or businesses based on the outlook for the next 3 months or 6 months. I bought my first stock in the spring of 1942. When I was 11 years old, and at that point, we were losing the war of the Pacific to the Japanese, and I mean, you read the headlines every day. It'd be kind of fun to go back and look at the headlines every day. I bought my first stock because things were looking terrible until the battle over, and I bought in a few months before that. So I think it's a terrible mistake. I think the worst mistake you can make in stocks is to buy or sell based on current headlines.
Hey, Warren, in the great debate between austerity and stimulus, and it may be almost unfair to frame it that way because we probably need a combination of both. How do you think about this issue when you look at what's happening in Europe and you look at this debate, which, by the way, is a debate that's happening here?
I think actually, nobody knows because you can't really control experiments, but actually I think we've handled it pretty well here, and much better on my side than the Europeans, but we've had an easier way to handle it than the Europeans. So if we'd had the structure, who knows what would happen, but because we've had a structure where if the Fed and the Treasury and the government basically said we've got the will and the ability to give this country a jolt on the way back. We can follow the policies we set out to follow, and we have had stimulus from the word go in the fall of 2008. We only called that particular bill, but we didn't even call out a stimulus bill because the term got unpopular. But we've had continuous stimulus. Anytime you're spending 7 or 8 or 9% more of GDP than you're taking in as a government, that is huge stimulus by any Keynesian definition. I don't care whether you call it stimulus or you call it anti-stimulus. It's stimulus when the government is spending way more than it's taking in. And we have stimulus right till today. I mean, we are running at whatever, maybe 8% of GDP is the deficit. And Keynes is probably cheering up in heaven.
Yeah, but the other side is saying it's too much.
But if we have an argument about it, we'll have a lot of argument about between now and election day. But I would say overall that the policies we've followed since really the great crash of 2008 have been pretty darn good. I mean, it'd be nicer if GDP were galloping maybe at 4% or 5%, but we have had a completely resuscitation of the viability of the banking system. We've had, all cases except residential construction, we have had the economy come back in a very significant way, and month by month it gets better, and we've got all these businesses, and again, with the exception of residential construction, most of them are having record earnings. The big ones are all having record earnings. We're employing more people, but not at any galloping pace.